placenta. So the placenta is a special organ which develops from about 8 weeks of pregnancy. The first animals that evolved that we've got evidence of, fossil evidence of, that may have had a placenta was about 70 million years ago. Before then, all animals produced eggs. Okay, so the offspring developed inside an egg, and then when it was a point of development, it hatched out of the egg. Okay, and then the placenta developed, allowing the offspring to develop inside the body of the female and be supplied with nutrients throughout the gestational period. So this is a diagram of a woman who's quite heavily pregnant, maybe about 35 weeks pregnant. What we've got here is this is the uterus, which you've seen before, okay, which stretches, and it is made of muscle fit tissue that's going to contract and squeeze that baby out of the cervix and vagina during birth, which is next lesson. Attached to the uterus wall is the placenta, and the umbilical cord attaches the baby to the placenta, and that joins the baby its tummy button in its stomach. The placenta is actually made up of the fetus's cells. So when we had that little embryo, some of the cells differentiated to become placental cells, and some of the cells became the cells of the baby. So actually in some cultures, because this is made from the baby's cells, they see it as part of the baby, and when they remove it during the birth process, they actually have a little burial ceremony for it because it's part of the fetus. So here we've got the baby, the uterus wall, the umbilical cord and placenta. These are the three things that you're going to have to, and the amniotic fluid or amnion, which surrounds the baby. They're the things you're going to have to know what they are and what their role is by the end of the lesson. We've already looked at the uterus, we've already looked at the cervix, which supports the baby and protects it from infection. The bladder there is where the urine is stored. So as you can imagine, when the baby's getting bigger and bigger, that bladder is squeezed and pressed down upon, which is why people who are pregnant need to go to the toilet quite often. And then the vagina, this is where the baby will eventually come out, and we'll look at that next lesson. So the cervix supports the weight of the baby and protects it from infection, and the uterus wall is made of muscle which protects the baby but will also squeeze and contract when it's time for birth. So draw lines from the diagram to the correct name and job. So you're going to have some questions on this later, so make sure that you're paying attention. You can watch this video back to make sure that you're getting the right answers on your questions. I would be disappointed if you're getting questions wrong when we've actually gone through that information, either on a video on the Firefly page or it's in your textbook. You need to be using the resources you've got available. So the amniotic fluid, this protects the baby. It's like a shock absorber basically, and that's here, which it protects the baby from any sort of knocks and bumps. Okay, there's fluid around it. We've got the placenta, which we're going to look in detail at in a moment, which carries oxygen, food and waste between it, takes oxygen and food from the mother's blood and then puts the waste back in the mother's blood. So that's what the placenta does. It takes nutrients from the mother's blood and gives it to the baby, and transfers waste products from the baby to the mother. And finally, the umbilical cord, this is like the little tube which transfers the baby's blood to the placenta. So it carries oxygen, food and waste between mother and baby. And that is there. Okay. So this is from a picture from your textbooks. We've got the amniotic fluid, blood vessels. This is the baby's heart. These are the baby's blood vessels that are moving, carrying the blood around the baby. and then the baby's blood vessel goes through this umbilical cord and goes to the placenta. Okay, so the evolution of, this is what we've said, it was a big jump forward when placentals evolved about 70 million years ago. A human fetus can get between 300 to 500 calories every day. As I said before, the growth and development was limited by how many nutrients could be put in the egg when it was laid. Now, you don't have to be limited by that. You can supply the developing fetus with 3 to 500 worth of calories of energy every day, and it's actually led to quite clever animals, development of large brains animals. So our brains require a lot of energy to build them, and we could only do that through using a placenta. So this is it in a bit more detail. You don't need to label a diagram or be able to draw it like this, but what I want you to show you is that we've got the baby's blood, say the blue blood vessels, which is low in oxygen because the baby's used all its oxygen, so this blood's not got much oxygen in, and then it goes into these tiny little capillaries, and this is the mother's blood, and her blood fills this area. So the blood never mixes. The mother's and the baby's blood does not mix, but it comes so close to each other that substances can diffuse, which is where they can move from where there's a high concentration of them to a lower concentration from the mother's blood to the baby's blood, and vice versa. So the mother's blood's going to have a lot more oxygen in it, and so the oxygen then diffuses into the baby's blood. It becomes oxygenated, and then this is the red vessel, and it'll go back to the baby and supply the baby with oxygen. What else will diffuse from the mother's blood is things like nutrients. So she's been eating, digesting her food, she's got nutrients in her blood, and those nutrients are going to diffuse from the mother's blood to the baby's blood. The blood vessels take the nutrients and oxygen back to the baby, where it will be used for growth, and then the baby's blood that's low in nutrients and high in carbon dioxide will go back to the placenta to get replenished. So the baby's blood and mother's blood come very close, but they do not mix. The substances needed for the baby to develop diffuse from the mother's blood to the baby's blood, and these include oxygen and nutrients, and then substances which are waste and toxic diffuse from the baby's blood back to the mother's blood, so she can get rid of them. So here's a little activity. So we'll look substances that can pass across the placenta from the mother to the baby. So here's a few of them: minerals, vitamins, alcohol, oxygen, water, drugs, carbon dioxide, food. So we've got two different boxes here: things that the baby needs and harmful substances. So one thing that the baby needs is minerals, such as calcium and iron. They need vitamins like vitamin C and vitamin D. They do not need alcohol, and that would damage the baby's developing organs, so that is harmful. Carbon dioxide is harmful, so it needs to pass out of the baby's blood. Oxygen is necessary, so it needs to get oxygen from the mother's blood. Chemicals from cigarette smoke would be harmful. This is why mothers should not be really drinking alcohol or smoking, because anything that's in her blood will diffuse into the baby's blood and could cause harm to those very tiny developing organs. Illegal drugs could also damage the developing baby. Water is obviously necessary, and food substances like glucose, amino acids and fats. Okay, so